In me now, and I want to say welcome to everybody.
Yeah, hello guys.
Welcome, Philip. Welcome back. I want to just introduce you once again to those very few who might not know you. This is our friend and noted mudflood and Tartaria researcher, Philipp Druzhinin. He's returning to the podcast today for his second remote visit with us. He joins us from Moscow, Russia. And many of you already do know Philip, I'm sure. But for those of you who don't, he has been a creator on YouTube for about at least 10 years at this point. He's been on this topic of mudflood and Tartaria amongst the earliest of anybody I know of, and he's certainly one of the first people doing quality content on Grand Tartaria that I discovered, in particular on YouTube. And he's probably introduced more people to this topic than most, if not everybody, in that area. We did part one of this kind of dialogue back on November 17th here on YouTube, and we recorded that chat. And as a matter of fact, Philip even helped us out at that time with the recording because my solution failed me that particular event. So thank you once again, Philip, for that help. That was amazing. Welcome back to the podcast and to hanging out with me here. Glad to have you back.
Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting. It's okay to do it before the New Year's because then we have a holiday. So I wanted to say thanks for inviting, and everybody Merry Christmas. And I mean, all the upcoming holidays should be fine. I think nothing's gonna happen. So chill out and relax.
There we go. Good. So, I thought what we would do together, Philip, is I sent over some, little, hey, this would be fun to talk about. I think we should, I wanted to share with everybody what my high level, like 2-minute cliff notes is of Grand Tartaria and mudflood, the whole topic that we're enjoying talking about together, that you've spent so much time exploring and explaining for people. To my understanding, and Philip, interrupt me anytime as I go off course here, but I'm going to keep it really short. When I think about Tartaria, I think about a mystery that I discovered a year or so back that we've come to understand has been probably discussed somewhere in the public sphere for at least the last 20 years, but less so in the YouTube world and the wider internet forum world until just the last few years, the last couple of years for many of us. But this Grand Tartaria civilization is one that most of us have come to understand was more or less finished being erased from history sometime in the 19th century. And this was accomplished through a combination of things like wars and propaganda and renaming of nations in the wake of worldwide conflicts, right? Where the whole map was redrawn in many cases, and people like us living in the present day in 2019 can barely name the regions and states that have been renamed in the 19th century and before that in the 18th century, because even then there was massive turmoil, many wars, and in that period there was natural disasters as well, plagues, famines. These things together form a picture for those of us investigating Tartaria and mudflood that look a lot like an area of history that's rich with opportunity to edit things. And in fact, we have sort of a record of an evolving, changing narrative about peoples, about cultures, about entire dynasties that today most of us probably get all our information about from Hollywood movies and Netflix original series these days, right? More so than ever before.
The most reliable source right now is Hollywood movies.
It's wild. It's wild because it sometimes feels like you're getting tricked every time you sit down to watch the movies. But I too I can't help but feel like I'm continuously trying to decode the movies that I watch because they feel like they have so much truth shown in front of our faces so much of the time too. Um, but so this is something that probably started, as far as our understanding, as early as the 17th century. The
Yeah,
little
okay. Let's just a little pause and break it down what you said about
There we go.
names of nations.
There we go.
Because Tartarian itself and the document that you sent me in your message about CIA something mentioned in Tartars
Mhm.
is a little bit different, in fact, because if you check the website of CIA.gov, you see that it has a little description here. So we're talking about national cultural development under communism.
Absolutely.
And this document was like released at 1998. So at that time, nobody was talking about Tartaria itself. But in the description, it has the different name of that nation. It names like it's named right now in Russia. They are named Tatars. And so this is where the mistake was made, because everybody was thinking that they were talking about the Tartars, because they misspelled it in the document twice. And so, but in the narrative of talking about the Muslim Tatars that are right now living in Russia.
Mhm.
So this is the mistake, and that's why alternative researchers should not even mention this document in their research. It's not even close about Tartaria. It's about the Tatars that are now named like this to erase their previous name of Bulgars. They were named Bulgars before, and to make up this legend about Mongols and Tatars, which were conquering the Eurasia before, in the medieval times. Right now, like
Right.
mainstream narrative is going on about Genghis Khan and all those Mongol Tatars that were like even in Hungary, in Italy, and sometimes even in France. So I mean, this is totally ridiculous information, because and that's why they supposed to find some nations that would be called Tatars, and they called them the Bulgars, who were living near the Volga River. And that was probably the best decision for them, because when they saw all this mentioned ancient maps where we see Tartaria, they probably had this logic like, let's call those people Tatars,
Mhm.
like they were like the descendants of Tartaria. But in the Tartarian maps, that particular region was not called Tartaria. It was called Bulgaria. So I mean, and Kalmyk Tartaria, so which is like a little different, and yeah, and it's like a little different from what we know as Tartaria. So this is where mistake goes, and what they do is actually just name me the names of United States. First one, America, right? U.S.,
Sure.
USA, which could be spelled like USA, like
Mhm.
and somebody could hear this sound spelling and spell it like literally like it's spelled. So I mean, and America itself, it's not, it's a different definition than the North America. It's a different definition than South America, because
Right.
America could be both at the
Right.
same time,
Right.
and you cannot just call one country America.
Right.
And so this is like
How many nations are in South America, right? And
yeah, it's like,
they're in the United States that are all
yeah,
different.
that's where a mistake goes, because people call the Empire of Ross, they call it the Empire of the Tartaria, but Tartaria was after the Empire of Ross, and this is where all the achievements of Empire of Ross were after automatically switched to the timeline when Tartaria was, because they supposed to be erasing the Empire of Ross, because like 300 years ago everybody knew about it. We had a bunch of noble people, like the family of La Roche, which is literally means from Ross.
Mhm.
And so like different wars, which was like White Rose against Red Rose, and this is like different spellings and different names, like
Came
Rusty.
across those roses. I came across the roses.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And this is like when you don't have the emblems, when you don't have the families, when you don't have any clans, at that certain point you have like a war, and that war is dependent on the flags. That's where the first colors come: white color against red color. And this is what we see throughout the whole history line, even to the modern 20th century, when we see so-called white army against red army in Russia. So this is like fighting for like a cycle of fighting, and it's ending up each every century. You see this fight between white and red, and this is like when they were split, the history was changed. Before that, they were united in one strength, in one empire. And right now we are fighting. And right now Russia is representing the Reds again, and the western part of the empire
Right.
is representing white.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it is the earliest parts of the story that. Thank you, by the way. That was.
But everybody is controlled by blue. Don't forget about it.
And all right, well, we'll get to the blues, I guess, here in a moment. But I was thinking that some of the earliest parts of the history of Tartaria include the history of the Great Schism of the Eastern and Western Catholic churches, the Eastern Orthodox Pope from the Roman Pope in the Vatican as well. So that's stuff that, probably you're one of the only people talking about, Philip, is that awareness of the fact that, a lot of us apply these labels like Grand Tartaria to the mystery and leave it at that because it just becomes, it sticks. It's a really catchy term to apply to this empire. But Tartaria probably represented by most people's understandings of the mystery a latter day remnant of an older, realer system, whatever it was, whatever we want to call it, hegemony, paradigm. So that was one of the things I wanted to cover with you today was, more about the Empire of Rus. To close on that National Cultural Development under Communism document, and I thank you for, addressing it briefly here. So we're really looking there at another example of that revision of history, that editing of history right there. Now, we have a doc there for those not familiar, and I shared it earlier, a link to that doc. I've talked about this document on the podcast in the past and found it very interesting. But as you point out, probably correctly, it's, we need to understand this is a declassified CIA document. So even taken at absolute face value, this was something that was produced by an asset embedded in Russia in the 1970s, who was reporting back to an American CIA handler. So therefore, maybe telling them what they wanted to hear as much as what they, really believed to be true. Maybe working with a prepared script of their own from the beginning. And as you give us the understanding, we're also suffering from a simple substitution error here with Berbers being mislabeled as Tartars in this particular doc, and maybe in some other places as well around that time, that then there again sticks, right? A label stuck. And
I'm gonna read you in what narrative. Or let us take the matter of history, which along with religion, language, and literature constitute the core of the people's cultural heritage. Here again, for the communists have interfered in a shameless manner. So they're talking about the communists, and communists appeared in the 20th century when the Tatars were already named the Tatars. So we had this, very straight line for these logics. For example, on 9th of August in 1944, so we're talking in the mid 20th century, the Central Committee of Communist Party sitting in Moscow issued a directive ordering the party's Tartar, which the misspelling is the R in the middle, provincial committee. So they're talking about the Tatar region, which was already the region of the Soviet Union. Okay, this is not Tartaria. To proceed a scientific revision of the history of Tartaria, and that's where they pulled in the country that was before to that particular region. So what the Tartar Provincial Committee, which was representing the region in Volga, near the city of Kazan, the Astrakhan Tartars, and maybe Crimean Tartars. That's it. And that's where they mention them laterly in this document. So the history of Tartaria to liquidate serious shortcomings and mistake of a nationalistic character committed by individual writers and historians in dealing with Tartar history. In other words, Tartar history was to be rewritten, let us be frank, was to be falsified in order to eliminate references to great Russian aggressions and to hide the facts of the real course of Tartar-Russian relations. That's where they blame Russians already, because, like, they creating this conflict that the Russian aggression. But the Tartars were the Bulgars before were the part of the empire, the Russian Empire. So what's the aggression? If you had like a district or province, as they say, provincial committee, why should it be the aggression to be the part of the country, right? And this was to no isolated case in every Muslim area. That's where they pull the Muslims into this, because some Tartars are Muslims, of course, and they're related to Turks. In every Muslim area within the USSR, historians on order of Communist Party have rewritten history to distort the facts so that the Russians appear always in good light. So, okay, blaming the Russians to be good, but
that they're creating a story.
Yeah, needless to say, but who were ruling the Russians at that time? 15 committee, 15 commissars of the committee, 14 of them were Jews, right? And so how do you blame the Russians to make a history that the Russians were in a good light? What's the logics for this? I don't see any logics. If you're talking about nationalistic, relations of Tartars and Russians, which were led by Jews, then blame the Jews for making this history for the Russians to be, aggressive in the context of history, in the narrative of history. I don't know the logics of this document. I think it's
commissar is an office, right? That's not an inherited station. That's not like the SARS. That's not a commissar is something that people come together and are designated or bestowed by the czars, the commissars. Like, what level in society are those people?
Yeah, and so the commissars were all the commissars came from the Europe and America. Everybody knows they came from New York and from Switzerland. So this is like a well-known fact, and they were funded by the German army banks, which were German agency, like intelligence agencies. Everybody knows that they were sealed in a diplomatic, how do you call, train, or wagon in a train, and they're like sealed by the German officers who were like saying, we are diplomats, nobody's in or out during the trip, and they were sent directly from Switzerland to Finland and then directly to Russia. So this is like very interesting and fact. So blaming those who were controlling Russians, in fact, their own agents and funded by German and American intelligence agencies, those Bolshevik commissars, blaming them to create Russians a history where Russians look more, great than Tatars. In fact, giving the Tartars their own name and pulling the previous empire to this document is totally falsification of what we know as alternative narrative about Tartaria.
Now we have, though, the clear, like, alliterative, the sound connection between Russian, the word we know today for the largest state and largest sort of empire in your part of the world, and Rus, right? So they're like, that's on purpose, right? That's intentional. in
Yeah,
terms of
because rust is reddish.
Mhm.
Reddish blood is also reddish, and it becomes more rusty when it's like drying out, and it's becoming more like dark red, and so it's even called scarlet sometimes. I mean,
Mhm.
so this is the color of the flag also shows that it was red. So I mean, that is what the connection.
Sure,
And
it
the red,
has.
red blood also, the original people, the local people who were living here had the red color of the blood.
Mhm.
Okay, and that's where the difference comes from.
So we're talking red bloods versus blue bloods, perhaps,
Yeah,
at some
blue,
level.
white, so-called white aristocratic, capitalistic. I can say, not capitalist, trade unions, Atlantis, all this stuff was, put to this ideology and propaganda of those merchant societies, of those Masonic orders, of those temple orders, of those who were, collecting all these pyramids that we see, Bilderberg Group, all this stuff, Rockefellers, Rothschilds, central banks, religions, and all this stuff. This is all what was made by the white flag. So, and they were controlled by the blue bloods, of course, but the blue bloods, those that I'm trying to research in my series about the Crown and Ray Bradbury shit.
Nice, nice. I know you've done a great job with your recent videos on the Empire of Rose. You did one a few months back, and then most recently, a month or so back, that I just watched to sort of get ready for, rewatch to get ready to sit down and chat with you. And I know that you're not a person who's advocating for a narrative that's like some sort of at all to be confused with a racist, Russo-Aryan, preeminent sort of characterization of history at all. I've watched enough of your content to know that you don't spend a lot of time and energy on that. And when you do address it, it's in the framework of what I've heard you discuss as sort of like these earlier generations, old world, like repopulation programs, people type programs, people engineering programs, like we saw in the obvious, the modern analogy, of course, is the eugenics programs of not only Nazi Germany, but of the United States in the late 18th and rather the 19th and early 20th centuries. Programs that didn't end until the 50s and 60s in some cases in the United
Yeah,
States.
somebody has to be mainstream. So if we have somebody who's like, on the site, like everybody know about eugenics, right? And that's why they blaming only them, but everybody else had the same programs.
Yeah. So this is something that I know is always there somewhere in some people's sort of minds when we're talking about Grand Tartaria and the history of Russia and the history of something called the Empire of Rus that we're only just learning and understanding anything about, many of us, for the first time. And that's something that I think is important to just at least acknowledge and let people know that that's not something that we're trying to push here in some kind of agenda driven fashion. So and that's something that is discussed when we're talking about the new chronology work of Fomenko and Nosovsky, when we're talking about things like that CIA declassified document, because everything has a point of origin that in a lot of cases is coming from the very sources that we would tend to think should be the most sort of suspicious of in a lot of ways. But there are also the places where we go and see clues that seem to tie into things that we're observing firsthand. I got that little banner going about how much footage you've shot in and around your area in Moscow. You've traveled. You, on your recent vacation, you found what was that? A mud volcano? A mud?
Yeah. I just,
Mud, like a whole mud landscape out there that just brought to life to me the reality of the potential for these things that we talk about when we casually drop terms like mud flood, mud flood, mud flood. No, we're talking mud flood, massive floods, be they slow moving, be they fast, be they sudden, or have they, maybe in some cases they take months or weeks or months to occur, where people watch their region slowly get erased, and have time to pack up and move out. But I literally have a Google alert set for mud flood, and I get an alert every couple of days about flooding, period, all around the world, because it's not that smart of a Google alert that it excludes all bad results. But I have gotten several real hits on mud flood type events happening around the world in 2019, talking house burying, landslides, and whole sections of regions being changed. In ways that'll take them years to recover from. So, this is a topic that I just can't dismiss. Your degree of footage that you've taken, I think one of your most recent videos was on the, finally sort of decoding some evidence of one of those bastion forts, a star fort there in your local area, right? And that was an awesome video, by the way. I love looking at your area and your content because it seems like that part of the world is at the heart of so much of this mystery. What was it you were talking about with respect to, and I really loved these images that you shared, I think it was on Instagram, with the old-fashioned crosses.
I think the information that came with the crosses, I mean, I've touched it a couple of times before. But you started to talk about Fomenko. I mean, if we are not touching Fomenko right now, I can talk about what I found on Fomenko because I promised to make a video about it. So I tried to calculate the number of the books first.
Yeah, we definitely have some time. I would love to address that point on Fomenko. We didn't go very far with it.
So I found that information that somebody was also trying to do that, and so what they found is like they called this article the post-historical kitchen of academic Fomenko. And so the fact of they're not trying to criticize the material itself, but what they're trying to say is like they also calculated the number of books. That's where I found also the reference here about the numbers. And so what they're saying is like from 1995 to 2010, it's like 15 years. Fomenko and Nosovsky published around 50 fundamental scientific, books with the 65 books in it. So it's like not 50 books, but 50 works with 65 books in it, and each with around 600 pages. And we are not mentioning that this is just a hobby for them. So I mean,
really,
they try to compare this amount with the 29 book work of Solovyov, one of the famous historian person, which took him around 30 years. And these guys are not talking about not only Russia here, they are talking about every country, right? So like Europe and stuff like this. So I mean, if you had a hobby, that's quite a hobby. So when we calculate from 2010, so it's like 9 years passed since 2010. Guess how much the books they published?
I'm guessing not very many.
34.
Whoa, geez, really?
Yeah. And so that guy was talking to Fomenko. He was like a friend of him.
So when somebody asks somebody if they've read Fomenko, they haven't read Fomenko because there's so much work from Fomenko and Nosovsky. You're not getting, most people are not getting through even the original new chronology books.
Yeah, and this is while they were, working in the university. They were working in mathematics. They were still working in science, and this is like a hobby, okay? And this is all presented in this legend to be like this. But okay, let's settle this out and check what the people who were acquaintance of the Fomenko say. They say like he was not even relying that those material that he was researching are fake before the 1995.
Wow.
Before 1995, he was saying, quote, uh, our new version of chronology leads us to redating ancient occasions and documents, but not declining them to be, no, proclaiming them to be fake. This is what he's saying before before he started and met Nosovsky. And the first book he published with Nosovsky, he completely forgot what he was saying 5 years before that. So, and he started to make all this conspiracy theory about, and making all this stuff like it was like Romanov's dynasty, um, order to erase the history that was before. Of course it was, but don't blame it everything to one, family line or bloodline. I'm not a great fan, but and in this case with the books, with the amount of work that they did, leads me to one thing, that they're like, a crazy printer which is printing each and every story that it's supposed to be printing. I mean, this is like enormous amount of work. I'm not sure anybody can give a scientific degree or a scientific resume on these books, because nobody's still mentioning them and as a reference, as a source. Not one alternative author like in 5 years mentioned them as a reference. So I mean, the popularity that they have it only on the bookshelves of those shops, and because it's like a conspiracy theory, and it's like making more people believe in this narrative
Mhm.
without understanding what exactly they are writing in those books, because it's impossible to keep it all together. You have to be like totally, I would say, insane to
Yep.
keep all those facts that they mention in those books, because they like totally meat processing each and every fact, calling people different names at the same same page, and you're like totally missing what they're trying to say. And it's like it's the way the mathematicians who are not a literature people, that who are not the book authors, they're like printing and printing books for money, was what I'm trying to say.
Interesting.
Okay.
So the more they publish, the better it is for them, because people will take it no matter what and put it on the bookshelf, whether they ever understand it fully or not, and whether it really has any value or not, too.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So it does. I mean, I've heard this critique, and I've only attempted to read the digital PDFs of the first volume of the new chronology because of its daunting size, frankly. What I've done to try to consume some of that material is listen to it narrated, listen to it read out aloud. And there's a channel on YouTube, guys, read all of them. So all of like the first 6 or 7 books, that original core new chronology that everybody refers to, and they don't worry about all the rest of the material these guys have come out with.
Yeah, when the people that met Nosovsky came to his house, they said, "Oh, look how many books you have." He said, "It's all mine." It's like all bookshelf was his
Just a
book.
bookshelf full of wall of
Yeah,
writing, all
yeah,
him.
all his books,
Wow.
all new chronology stuff. So it's like they're like jaw dropping fact, because nobody knew they published so many books. Who was buying those books? In fact, I don't know,
Right.
but
So
somebody was.
it's interesting to try to keep them in their own perspective and understand that, as far as you're concerned, their pop culture, their X-Files conspiracy theory.
Yeah, one idea was
Right.
published in so many different, facts, and they like asking them, "Is it so hard to write so many books?" And Nosovsky said, "It's hard before you understand the algorithm." And they like say, "Oh, he knows the algorithm," and I interpreted it. It's like a mathematician who is printing Control C, Control V, Control C, Control V, and that's how he prints. This is what I think about algorithm in writing books. This is like totally copying whatever you did before.
Mhm.
Not interesting for me.
There we go. Well, that's a great perspective on Fomenko and Nosovsky, and maybe we all should spend a little less time obsessing over what we think they got right and got wrong, because we probably have better sources for the periods of history covered by their new chronology, and maybe can just as soon dispense with that, because
one simple fact that you and me supposed to understand, that what we are seeing right now, what we observe in the evidence we observe, they are not mentioning it at all.
Interesting. Yeah, that's right. You mentioned that previously. They don't even touch on it.
Yep. They don't even touch 19th century at all.
Right. Because it gets too close to their time in history and gets too close to the people who
it's too sensitive. It's too sensitive for those who paying them,
Absolutely. Just taking a quick peek at my notes here for us. So I won't put you on the spot on that weird article that I found, but are you familiar, by the way, with that lib.ru, that library?
Yeah, that's just a website.
What is that? Is it a small website? Is it a big website? Is it a Wikipedia?
It's rather big, but I don't use it usually because it's like more like non-official. I would say it's not a shop or something. It's like unofficial copies there, so it's like, I don't think it's like people who don't care about the copyright. Maybe they publish their text there. I don't know, or maybe somebody's just stealing the text and publish it.
Okay.
Just to SEO the certain keywords and get more attention in search from the people who search in certain books, and so they like publish different books there.
There we go. That's what I was. The gist I got was that it seemed independent published, but I couldn't determine if I was looking at a alternative Wikipedia of some kind or simply a like glorified web forum where anybody could publish anything and you see just as much fiction on there as truth. It seemed academic. It had an academic feel to it, this library. But of course, all of the documents are in Russian. And so what I'm viewing is basically an English translation scraped by Google off of the web browser of anything that I see on that website. So it's tantalizing, but it's very difficult to really, it does sound wiki-esque, Bretzy, to pull down meaningful information off of it for us. But so you wouldn't place them on your high list of resources for interesting history and discovery.
I certainly looked at the article you sent me. So
right.
I mean, it starts with some long read type of like long read. When you like supposed to say one sentence, but you say it like for several pages before you say it actually. So
okay, so that wasn't just me. Okay.
So this is long read story. I mean, but the facts that they mention are actually very interesting because I never heard about those facts, and I try to recheck him as what I do at my ordinary job. I always check my facts, and so I've tried to check first two, and those first two, matched, and all the rest are just made up facts. So it's like list of around 10 facts, and like one or two are like original and really interesting, and the rest are just illusions and speculations, I'd say. And so it's very interesting to understand what chronocapsule is. Chronocapsule is like certain place where you can hide yourself and you like seal yourself before somebody found you in a couple of centuries, and then unlock you and you're totally safe. And he mentions like two cases of this, like somebody found a rat or something, a squirrel, and it's like ran away, and somebody found a person who was in the ice.
Right. So the paper started with a bunch of like mathy sounding sciencey sounding gobbledygook for everybody not aware. I'm trying to give them a little context here on the chronocapsules paper, and goes from a high level theory of what the chronocapsule is or isn't. I'm sure Philip is still here with us. He's just doing something off camera, but starts again, Russian translated page by Google. So my definition of, or my comprehension of the doc is limited at best, but it goes from there to relating a bunch of stories that some of us have heard before about people passing in and out of dimensions. They talk about Flying Dutchmen and, people appearing out of nowhere or disappearing to nowhere throughout history that we're aware of. So they take it from this high level thing to a, sort of remember these different stories you've heard of, in not so many words. And the chronocapsule itself is some sort of environment, we could say, that sounded a lot to me, Philip, like a hard drive, a storage unit on a giant macro scale computer. Or maybe I have my scale and perspective really messed up in terms of how big it needs to be physically or not. But it was a neat article. It's interesting to, hear you say that most of the facts after the initial premise that sounded really neat, end up really not panning out to being much of anything. So that's, it's too bad.
Have you heard about finding a person from Titanic?
No, I don't think so.
That's
like a Titanic survivor, right? Who claims they were on the boat.
Yeah, he also mentioned finding in this list, so that's discrediting all the rest. So I mean, and I've in fact, I never interviewed Sylvia Ivanova.
Didn't you?
No,
I
never.
swear you did.
No. So that wasn't me.
Get that.
And she's not the author of There Are No Forests on Earth either. So
she's not the original author, right?
No.
But it's on her channel though, and that's where it got probably most well known, right?
We should copyright strike her. I'll tell David to.
No! The guy.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
God,
the guy's name is David, and he's from Vladivostok. It's like closer to Pacific Ocean. He's like on the other side of the Pacific Ocean from you. So
okay. All right. Well, I did see his video first, and then I listened to her narration of the video because did she just perform it for him? No, he did it. He spoke the narrative the first time, right? On There Are No Trees on Flat Earth.
He's not the original author of the article. Also, he was translating and editing some effects, combining them together and making the whole video. So it's like he was the one who translated it in English and tried to make a narration.
There you go. Okay, so he's the first one to do it for us in English.
Yeah, and then a bunch of people tried to make copy and make another sound.
American accents trying to narrate it. I don't like them nearly as much. I really don't. Yeah. So,
but they made even more views than he did. So it's like when I totally analyzed the view count, it was total like 2 million views in a month. So like
some of these other channels, yeah,
all the channel combined, there were 2 million views.
Oh, really? Okay, for all of them.
But now his channel was deleted by YouTube, in fact,
right,
a year ago, and he was like, trying to make a new one. I don't know if he still survive. I'll send you a link. Maybe you try to promote him. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll definitely subscribe to him, and I'd love to see what he's doing with his comeback, trying to get back out there. That's amazing. So, so I wanted to get back to that Empire of Rose conversation just for a little bit more if we can, Philip. And I was fascinated by the antique crosses that you showed recently, and we've all seen and talked, those of us who have been watching, consuming madly everything we can about Mud Flood and Tartaria and Antiquitech. Watched a lot of content of yours where you look into the actual aerials that we see on top of many of the church buildings in particular, but on many of the older ornate buildings that are still together and still standing in our cities. We see sometimes they've been altered or broken down, and we don't see these older crosses anymore that are the kind of 3-tier cross, right? It's got a short crossbar, long middle crossbar, and a third smaller crossbar below it. We associate them with churches, right? They were probably on other buildings as well at one point in time.
Yeah, it's just simply not the. I don't think it's. It was like published by me like a year ago. It was like a video or something. I was talking about it. So it's like they had an article in the Soviet times, maybe late Soviet times, about the experiment with TV antennas. And so the people in some certain region were living very far from the major cities, major routes, major logistics. They were like far away from everybody, like 1,000 kilometers. And they were trying to experiment with the TV signal, trying to catch it so they can establish a better TV signal.
Right.
And so they're trying to make this one antenna, that form of antenna. Everybody was experimenting. Like,
I've watched a few of these videos.
Yeah, and so the guy that made the best antenna had the shape of this type of cross, but in fact, the lower bar was like a little bit shifted, like.
Okay, it wasn't totally straight on a.
Yeah. And that's what we have right now on Russian crosses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have like a little shift.
Really.
Lower bar, and the same of the first and the second bar are pretty much the same, similar to what you see on those pictures that are posted. So I think this is somehow connected to the TV signal, or maybe sending signal to somebody else, and maybe like sending some type of frequency signals. I don't know, and maybe that shows us that they were establishing this connection. So I'm trying to speculate with this on the Skype stuff and stuff like this. Maybe they had it in ancient times, some type of projections or some type of,
right?
I would say 3D, maybe some visualizations. I don't know. Who knows?
Well, I mean, we've seen those images of like old ghostly looking projections in people's living rooms, and they're easily explained away as hoaxes or a style of art that was done at the time with photography, because you could do fun things in the developing room and put a person's image on a photo. Like there's always been Photoshop, and people have always played with it, but maybe a simpler.
Yeah, how do you actually explain talking to somebody like who is distant from you? I mean, if you praying to some certain saint, I would say like let's say you praying Holy Mary. How do you supposed to talk to her? Just with the praise, or if you have some certain device in this building where you go,
really puts you in touch with them,
and you like the device is turned on, and you send your message to the certain signal, and they receive it with something and give you back some feedback with some certain actions or obstacles that you receive. I don't know.
Sure.
Maybe this is supposed to make sense. I don't know.
Absolutely. No, it does. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more work to be done in, exploring that and trying to get to any place of any conclusions. Maybe no conclusions can be drawn. It makes me think about the difference in history and in religion in history between a time when people believed they needed their priests and the church itself in order to go confess their sins, in order to go commune with God. They couldn't do it individually. Today in the new age world, everybody can meditate their way to communicating with the eternal spirit of the universe, right? And if they're more faithful, they can still not go to church, but get down at their bedside and say their prayers at night for their family and for their loved ones and for their greatest hopes and dreams. Maybe that represented a change in technology, in the connection technology between the universe and people, that, okay, you don't need to go to the church anymore to have your prayers heard. You can have your own relationship with God. Of course, that, is verging into totally different territory than what we've been spending time on, and I don't want to open up those kind of cans of worms either. So
talking about the connection and the I would say the what was the best thing, the most important thing for the Bolsheviks after the revolutions? They were capturing the stations, railroad stations, in fact, airports, and the telegraph, which was the place where we were sending the radio messages and all the messages and telephones, telephonograms and stuff like this. So when you cut the connection, when you control the communication, you control the population. And so you control the place where the communication going on, and you totally cut off the people from the connection with the higher beings who were supposed to look after us, as what the Bible says, as what the other books say. Like you're supposed to like pray for some reason. It's not like it's not made up. You're supposed to pray for some reason, but nobody is like bragging of some good results after the praying right now.
Right. It's like the connection is severed.
Only some scams making money on all this stuff,
right?
And that's it.
Because they have a connection.
Yeah, they had the personal connection right now, and they can sell you for money. All these fake connections.
Yep. Well,
I hope that makes sense, guys. I mean, I'm not trying to discredit all this. I'm not right now. I'm pro-religion because religion's supposed to mean something in the physical expression, right? It's what you get. It's what you receive for doing something. At least we're supposed to believe it's the logic. Like you want the present and you receive the present at the Christmas, right?
Right.
That's the tradition. You work hard the whole year and you receive the present for that.
It is kind of one of those things where you do reward yourself at this holiday for being good each year. Even, as much as it's about giving to everybody else, even just the celebrations and the time that you spend with family and the food, gifts aside, it's still kind of a informal vacation for everybody and time of rest, right? But
why lie? Why lie that somebody like Santa exists? Like somebody's bringing all those presents if you buy them. Sure. It's because it was before. It was like this before. Somebody was, sending some gift to you, or virtual gift, I don't know, spiritual gift.
Well, and is it even the birth of Jesus or not on the 25th of December? That's often contested out in the conspiracy world, in the alternative history world, in the even in the History Channel, Discovery Channel documentaries world. They're not afraid to take that on. They're not afraid to do documentaries where they talk about how, Jesus was much more likely to have been born sometime between the spring and at the latest October, when animals and people were, when food was abundant and people were having babies, and that there weren't as many winter births at this particular time. I don't know that I believe that to be totally true, but either way, Philip, we've just got, I was planning on keeping you for as much as I could today, as much as an hour. We've probably talked about each of the points that I had that I wanted to bring up. We've got, by the way, 20 people hanging out with us in the chat today and watching this stream. So I think we should thank them just for joining us and being here this whole time. Most of them have been here in the chat the entire time. Thank you, everybody. Maybe if you have a couple more minutes, we could take a question or two from the chat. If anybody has a question for Philip specifically, everybody's had really on topic comments this entire time and had great stuff to say about you. I'd also like to invite you, Philip, to expand on any point that we've talked about up to now, or if you had anything new that you wanted to mention maybe while we were chatting today, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, if you wanted to know more about Empire of Ross, I mean, I have to collect some more material, some more factage, and Yeah, and we probably make a video on that. So that
Got
would be
my
more.
Empire Bros gear on right here for you, everybody. There it is.
Yeah, very
Probably
good
have
one.
one of the only ones in the wild out there right now. Philip knows it.
Yeah, and I also said like people, anybody can join this, challenge and find what facts you can find on this empire. So maybe you can find and expand on Gog and Magog war, which was also mentioned in some Duke of Ross, and
That
maybe you
just
can
got on my
research it.
radar, Philip, too.
Yeah,
Gog and Magog and the Book of Og.
yeah,
And that's something that I think I may be able to tackle is that book, because it's not 7 volumes long and 700 pages each like the new chronology is. So,
yeah. It's like, what are they saying in Latin? Oraculus Ezekielus is like the Ezekiel, the prophet of Ezekiel.
Ezekiel.
AC Ioannis Gog. Gog is like the Duke of the Duke whose name was Gog. Ducem Imperatorum Tartarum. So it's like they also mention in Tartarus there. Q nomini istos sit appellandos Velsinanos and nomen prorim in ipsim Tartarum Imperatorem. So also naming Gog as the imperator or empire of Tartaria. Also in this particular line about the Gog. So, I mean, this is very interesting, and Bible needs to be reread by me, because I need to read all those stuff like Gog Teram, Magog, Principe Supreme, Russia, Moscovia, and Georgia. It's like Flavy was mentioned in Gog. Gog was the ruling of Georgia. Also, Georgia is Caucasus. And how do you call white race people in America?
What do we call them?
Caucasians.
Sure. Yeah, the Caucasus, the Caucasians. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the Caucasians lived on Caucasus, first of all, and the Georgia is on Caucasus, and the Magog lands were above Georgia, which is right now Russia and all those Caucasus lands. So very interesting fact, in fact. So, and all those people from Georgia and Armenia could be found in Spain also. Imagine that around 4% of French people are Armenian people, and a bunch of DNA distribution also goes to the land of Basques and all those, land of Iberica.
I was going to mention the Basques when you brought that up. I mean, that too sprang to mind for sure.
So that united culture was also mentioned in the DNA researches. So, I mean, the first people and these civilization of Ross were established near these Caucasus Mountains. That's why we all connected with these genes. I mean, all these languages and all those lands. And it's not only white race, like they trying to pull the people only to white race, like Caucasus was white. You have to go to Caucasus right now and see those people. They don't look exactly like
they're not regular white people.
Yeah, they have all the variety of white and even to the black. I mean, you can find black skinned people there. There's a lot of them. And Richard Lopez found the picture of the Russian Caucasian who looked totally black, and that was like beginning of 20th century, and he was awesome. Looking. Yeah, so I mean,
he does great.
It's like the key region, all this region like Crimea, Black Sea, Turkey, Caucasus, Bulgaria, Greece. It's like very close area, which also Fomenko is trying to mention as a holy land. I mean, and he also pulls Jerusalem to Turkey, and so I mean. This is not simple speculation. We can see all these tracks, and the mud volcanoes are also there, because I was there and I was filming it. It's a whole bunch of mud volcanoes there, and in Turkey, in Azerbaijan, and Caucasus Mountains, it's full of mud. Everywhere is mud. All this mud flowing from everywhere. So I mean, this is the key region for this mud flood research, I think, and I think next year would be great to find out more facts there.
Yeah, everybody go find Philip's videos from earlier this year on his vacation where he found the mud landscape that was so wild to see. That's what you were just referring to right there, and some great content came out of that trip. We're all benefited from you going on that trip and using your mud flood goggles on that trip. So anyway, everybody, I think we should get ready to jump off here, and I want to thank everybody once again for joining Philip and I today. Of course, we could sit here for 4 hours, but it's heading on into the middle of the night in Moscow, Russia, and I've got a family downstairs probably getting ready to start looking for me. They'll be banging on this door any minute. But Philip, thank you for taking time right before your holidays to hang out with us once again as well, because I think this was a really great chat, and we got perspective today on Fomenko and Nosovsky. We got perspective today on the National Cultural Development Under Communism document that I do think is a big topic, like that a lot of people might get hung up on and think maybe more is there than is really there.
Yeah.
And giving us a preview into Empire of Rus, which I look forward to continuing to hear more from you about in the coming year on your own channels. I've been showing Mudflood Advanced Research and your own Philipp Druzhinin YouTube channel in the background here for the last few minutes of the feed. So I hope everybody who isn't already subscribed finds their way over to your channel and joins the hunt with you there.
Yeah, the hunt will not be as intense as it was like 3 years ago. Of course, I like right now working on 2 jobs already, so I was like totally have no time at all. So that's why my videos became less recent. So I mean, less frequent, I think.
Anybody coming new to you right now has a year's worth of watching just to get caught up. No problem. So you've done a lot of work already for us. So
yeah, probably.
You're not done thinking about it. We know you're not done discovering new things about the mud floods, about Grand Tartaria, about the Empire of Rus. So
yeah,
we'll be here when you put anything out. Believe that. So
yeah, thanks everybody in the chat. Thanks a lot for inviting, and looking forward for more connections with you guys and more chatting.
Me too, 100%. Everybody, we'll see you soon. You know what to do. Smoke some indica and do shit anyway.
Yeah, see you later.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
See.
All right. Bye, everybody. Good chat today.